Thank you all for coming today, and today I'll be talking to you about an aspect of my PhD work, and that is to study the Downton Bonebed. And hopefully by the end of this talk you'll understand what I mean by calling it a lost world. So, where do we start? Well, the Downton Bonebed probably doesn't spike anyone's imagination, and that's because it's actually not a well-known deposit. It first enters the nomenclature in 1906, and this is Gertrude Ellis wearing a fine geological bonnet, as you can see, as was the fashion. She wrote a paper in 1906 on the highest rocks of the Ludlow district, and in that paper they mention the Downton Bonebed. After that, it kind of disappears. In the intervening years between me studying it and Ellis naming it, it's appeared in the literature maybe 15 times, and the vast majority of those times it's basically a sentence saying the Downton Bonebed is here. So, a bit of context for those who are unaware. The Downton Bonebed dates from the Middle Edwardian, so for argument's sake let's call it 224 million years, and that's within the Ludlow. And it's within the Downton, oh, where's the pointer? There we go. It's within the Downton Castle sandstone formation and within the Platyshes shale member. It also has the Ludlow Bonebed in its lower reaches, and in the intervening formation we have the other Silurian Bonebed of the Welsh borders, which is the Teamside. So geographically, where are we looking for the Downton Bonebed? Well, they've reported it from a borehole sample in Buckinghamshire, Middle Misden. We also have it reported from Staffordshire and Worcestershire, but I guess most notably for myself in terms of the study that I've been doing, the Welsh borders. And in particular, I'm looking at this area here, Weir Quarry, and a little bit of Ludford Lane material. But you can see that this is the outcropping of the Downton Castle sandstone formation, and there are a number of localities along here, as well as here at Linley Brook. So this is Weir Quarry, this is my field locality. This is in the spring, because if I came here in the summer, I'd spend most of my field season, as it's the Welsh borderlands, doing gardening to actually get at the outcrop. This is the upper part of the Platyshes shale member, and this grey unit is the sandstone member, and the bonebed comes from there. So this is a cut section. I apologise for the darkness of the image at the corner there, but this is a cut section of the Downton Bonebed from Weir Quarry. And you might immediately sort of think, Luke, what are you talking about? Where are the fossils? Well, unlike the Ludlow Bonebed, which is of course this very dark, bone-rich material sat on top of the upper Whitcliffe formation, which sticks out like a sore thumb, the Downton Bonebed is a lot harder to see. But it's basically focused in on these two areas, these two sort of rapidly deposit churned areas. And if we were to break the rock along bedding planes, this is what we would see. And you can see here all these pale tan fragments. These are thelodont denticles, which are sort of one of the most dominant fossils in the bonebed, of course. And these are ostracod casts on the outside. So, looking at the sedimentology very briefly, we can see that the Downton Bonebed is, as you'd expect for this part of the world, it is a siltstone. We've got a fine-grained siltstone, which represents these two sections here, heterolithic bedding in the upper part, and then we've got this coarser grain material, still a silt but a bit coarser, quartz rich, and it's got lots of bioclast in the form of denticles and other lovely material like that. So the paleontology, obviously it's one of the reasons we're here today, I guess. So the dominant, I guess, vertebrates that you would find in the Downton Bonebed, considering it's a bonebed, are thelodonts and acanthodians. These aren't my specimens, of course, because I work in the Welsh borders and you never find anything as lovely as this. But essentially, this is a thelodont. It's a jawless fish. It's got a squamation of dermal denticles, a bit like a shark. And this is an acanthodian. You can see, again, we've heard earlier on today in the fish talks about these guys, but they've got large fin spines, but also a covering of dermal denticles. And in life, they would have looked a little something like this. Of course, I work on the Welsh borders, so this is my material, which is all knackered. But basically, the key points here are that you can see on these specimens there were processes. These have all been knocked off, and we can see in other deposits elsewhere in the world, and actually in the Welsh borders where preservation is better, that these processes would be in place. So these have all been taken off by abrasion or mechanical means. We can also see we've got some Thelodus parvidens. Interesting point with those is that they are quite rare in the Downton Bonebed, whereas in the Ludlow Bonebed, according to the literature, they are very common. So we seem to have a full turnover. We've also got some oh my god, I've forgotten what the word is. Acanthodians, of course, Onostolepis and Gomphonctus. We also got some macro specimens. We've got Oncus merchansoni, which is a bit of a waste bin taxon, mostly known just from fin spines. But we've also got some different macro invertebrates. Modulopsis is the only bivalve, and Tuberculus, formerly Platyschisma, that is also present, but they're preserved as internal moulds. We do also have some micro specimens. We've got some ostracods. We've also got some brachiopods, and we can see here the shells there are present because they're lingulates, so they have phosphatic shells. They haven't been dissolved away. Unlike this lepidotid here, you can see again it's an internal mould because the calcitic aragonitic shells have dissolved away. I guess the nicest fossils actually, really, despite being a bone bed, are the plants. And they're preserved beautifully in 3D, and we can see a range of taxa there. And how they're preserved is actually quite important in reinterpreting the environment, as we'll see a little later. But we also have these nematophytes. These are an odd group of organisms once thought to be actually all related to each other, but they've never been found in biological association. So they probably represent different organisms. And we also have some more weird stuff, some phytoclasts, some fungal hyphae, and this dispersed organic material. It's enigmatic, it does have some form and shape, but we're not entirely sure what exactly they belong to. We also have two flavours of trace fossil. You've got Tychicnus, which is this structure here with these spritons, and then we've also got Planolites, so quite a low diversity. And that's the thing with doing such a holistic project, is that it allows one to reconstruct a lost world, if you will. And usually what happens with Silurian reconstructions is you get one of two things. Either the artist, and they are both good bits of artwork, but either the artist will try and cram in all life on Earth in one image, which to Joe Public makes them think that this was all going on in a very close space of time, or spatially, or we get worse sins. So this is I don't know if it's been updated, but certainly this featured on the BBC website for a long time for the Silurian. This is, of course, the Rhynie chert, which is Devonian, and a really specific environment. So we're going to talk a little bit, and there's lots of different lines of evidence, but we're just going to talk a little bit about the reason for this low diversity that we see. And one driving factor could be salinity. We can use the Baltic Sea as a model, as it represents something similar to what we would see in, say, the Downton Sea those 424 million years ago. It's a restricted seaway, and basically Robertson in the 80s did a study checking the salinities as you move from normal marine conditions back into brackish to freshwater conditions, and how that affected the diversity of life. And we can see here that it's quite diverse here in the marine fauna back here, but as you get into, say, the Gulf of Finland, diversity jumps off a cliff and it tumbles down. So, for example, bivalves go from 92 all the way to 4, whereas fishes, although still diverse, have taken a severe hit from their normal marine conditions. And as we get into almost normal freshwater conditions, obviously no marine forms are present. And that's kind of what we're seeing in the Downton Bonebed, and it certainly is a model that we can use to try and understand. This is the diversity of the different groups I have, and you can see it's very low. If I was to plot plants on here, they actually represented by 6 different groups or fossils, but obviously they're not living in the water, they're living on the land, so they're not affected by the salinity. So when we reconstruct environment, and this is the Downton 424 million years ago on land, we can use all sorts of different evidence to draw in an image. So I should point out that obviously I'm only giving a 12-minute talk today. Still on time. So basically I can't necessarily explain all the different lines of evidence, and obviously if there are more questions I'll be happy to answer them. But essentially what we have here is this terrestrial environment, plants, early plants and sort of allies growing on the land, we have this fluctuating salinity signal from the fossils and the sedimentology. So there is the potential for large river systems flowing into the Downton Sea. You'll notice there are wildfires. That's evidenced by the fossilization of the plants themselves. And the sedimentology suggests that every so often large storms are coming in and actually churning this material up and depositing it, because the key thing is that the animals and plants are not living together. They are being deposited in one deposit. But if you interpret it that, you would assume they'd all be in the same place roughly. So underwater, what we're seeing is actually not this sort of sparse environment that was represented by the Downton Bonebed, but there's probably far more diversity going on, and this material is then being brought in. Of course, we could talk about sorting biases as well, but essentially this is a reconstruction of the Downton Sea. You've got Eurypterids cruising along the top, and I haven't shown you those because they're even worse than some of the other fossils. But we've got things like Theolodus here. This is estimated up to 1 metre, so we've gone all out on this guy. We've got Sclerodus, and we've also got some, this is Paralogania. This is sort of hiding away from the predators, as well as your Acanthodian there. So just like to give thanks to my supervisory team. I'd also like to thank Dr. Mark Wynne for preparing this excellent bits of artwork. I'd like to thank Palas for funding me and allowing me to talk to you today. As I say, any questions, please feel free to grab me today at any time. If not, email me or use my Twitter. Thank you very much.